The desperate battle begins. The Emerge's empire had come with fire and fury. Their fleets darkened the stars, their warships moving like silent predators through space. They had destroyed every colony in their path, leaving behind nothing but ashes. Now they had reached Sol 3, Earth. Humanity's defenses were crumbling. The Terran Defense Fleet, once a proud force, was now a desperate collection of damaged ships. They had fought bravely, but the enemy was too strong. The Emerge's empire had technology far beyond anything humans had seen before. In the command center of the Terran flagship, Vanguard, Admiral Ethan Rains stood with clenched fists. His face was lined with exhaustion, his uniform stained with sweat and blood. His fleet had been fighting for hours, but they were losing. One by one, his ships were being destroyed. The enemy was closing in. "We need reinforcements now," Rains shouted. His officers looked at him, but no one had an answer. Reinforcements weren't coming, except for one hope: the Invictus, the warship that never arrived. The Invictus was supposed to be here hours ago. It was humanity's most powerful warship, a Titan-class dreadnought with advanced weapons and an experimental energy core. If it arrived, they might still have a chance. But it was nowhere in sight. The enemy fleet moved closer, their massive capital ships forming a blockade around Earth, their weapons charged, glowing with deadly energy. The next attack would be the final blow. Admiral Rains slammed his fist on the table. "Where is the Invictus?" His voice was hoarse, filled with frustration. No one had an answer. Had it been destroyed? Had it malfunctioned? Had it abandoned them? If the Invictus didn't come, this was the end. The final stand. "Sir," a young officer spoke, his voice shaking. "The Emerge's fleet is preparing for their final assault." Rains took a deep breath. "Then we fight." He opened a channel to every remaining human ship. "This is Admiral Rains. The enemy is coming, and we have no reinforcements. But we are Terrans. We do not surrender. We do not run. We fight. And if we fall as warriors." A moment of silence. Then, one by one, captains across the fleet responded. "With you till the end, sir. For Earth, we fight." The human fleet moved forward, their damaged ships forming a tight formation. They launched everything they had: missiles, plasma cannons, railguns, a desperate last strike. The first wave of attacks hit the enemy ships. Some exploded, but many kept coming. The Emerge's empire had shields too strong, armor too thick. Then the enemy fired back. Flashes of light filled space as enemy plasma beams tore through human ships. The Athena was the first to fall, its hull splitting in two. The Resolute followed, vanishing in a fiery explosion. Humanity's fleet was dying. Admiral Rains watched in horror as his ships vanished from the tactical screen. His heart pounded. This was it. A final red alert flashed across his screen. The Emerge's fleet had locked onto Earth. They were about to wipe out the planet. A light in the darkness. Then everything changed. A sudden energy spike appeared on the sensors. Something was coming. "Sir," a technician gasped. "A warp signature. It's massive." The holographic screen flickered, showing a tear in space itself. A massive warship emerged, its black hull shimmering with blue energy. It was the Invictus. But something was wrong. It didn't just look advanced. It looked impossible. Its hull was no longer the standard Terran alloy. It looked sleek, alien, almost unreal. The enemy fleet turned their weapons toward it, sensing a new threat. Admiral Rains stared at the screen. His mind raced. How? Where had it been? What had happened to it? Then, without warning, the Invictus moved. In an instant, it fired one single beam of light, and an entire enemy battleship disintegrated. A stunned silence filled the command center. The Emerge's fleet froze, and Admiral Rains whispered the words everyone was thinking. "What are we looking at? A warship that shouldn't exist. Silence filled the Terran command center. Admiral Ethan Rains stared at the holographic display, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The Invictus had fired a single beam, a quiet, almost effortless attack, and an entire enemy battleship had ceased to exist. Not exploded, not broken into debris. It had vanished. The officers around him were frozen. Some gaped at the screen. Others whispered in shock. No one could explain what they had just seen. "Sir," a technician finally managed to speak, his voice unsteady. That shouldn't be possible. The energy reading from that shot. It's beyond anything we've ever seen." Rains swallowed hard. His hands gripped the edge of the command table. "Open a channel to the Invictus." The communications officer hesitated. I'm trying, sir, but I'm getting nothing." No response. No signal. Rains frowned. That wasn't right. The Invictus was supposed to be under Terran command. It should have responded immediately. But something was different. The enemy hesitates. Across the battlefield, the Emerge's fleet hesitated for the first time. The aliens had expected an easy victory. Humanity was weak, their fleet broken. But now, they were facing something unknown. The Invictus hovered in the void, silent, unmoving. Its black hull gleamed with an eerie blue energy, shifting like liquid metal. It looked nothing like the warship humanity had built. One of the alien warlords, aboard the dread carrier Zoktar, watched through his own tactical display. His species had conquered hundreds of worlds, wiped out civilizations, enslaved entire star systems. But this thing that had just arrived, it was wrong. "Destroy it," the warlord snarled. "I don't care what it is." The command was given. The Emerge's fleet turned all their weapons toward the Invictus. Thousands of plasma bolts, railgun slugs, and missiles roared through space, aiming straight for the warship. This time, the Invictus did not remain silent. The impossible defense. As the weapons closed in, something unexpected happened. The Invictus shifted, not in space, but in form. Its shimmering hull rippled, and for a moment, it seemed to become intangible. Then, every single enemy attack passed right through it. The entire command center aboard the Vanguard gasped. "That's not possible," whispered an officer. It just phased through the attacks." Rains felt a chill crawl up his spine. What have we created? The Emerge's fleet saw it too. The warlord aboard the Zoktar rose from his throne, his mandibles clicking in alarm. Before he could give the next command, the Invictus moved, and it moved fast. 1 second, it was a motionless titan. The next, it was right in the center of the enemy fleet. Then it fired. One shot, one massacre. No sound existed in space, but if it did, the battlefield would have been filled with screams. A single pulse of blue energy radiated from the Invictus. The moment it hit, 10 enemy warships vanished instantly. Not destroyed. Not even debris remained. It was as if they had never existed. On the command deck of the Vanguard, everyone stared in horror. This wasn't just advanced technology. This was something else. Something beyond human understanding. Rains barely found his voice. Find out who's piloting that ship. Now. But as his officers scrambled, a new problem emerged. The Invictus was not responding. It wasn't just silent. It was acting on its own, and nobody knew if it was still on their side. The impossible power of Invictus. The battlefield was silent. The Emerge's fleet, once an unstoppable force, now floated in uncertainty. 10 of their warships had vanished in an instant. No wreckage, no escape pods, just gone. Admiral Ethan Rains stared at the holo display, his mind racing. The Invictus had fired one pulse, a single, effortless wave of energy, and entire capital ships had ceased to exist. "Sir," a technician whispered, her voice trembling, "we're still getting no response from the Invictus. No signals, no transmissions. It's acting on its own." Rains gritted his teeth. That was the problem. The Invictus was not obeying orders. It was fighting, yes, but not as a part of the Terran defense fleet. It was something else now. The enemy's desperate counterattack. Aboard the Emerge's command ship, Zoktar, the alien warlord slammed his fist against the control panel. His mandibles clicked rapidly in frustration. This was not how it was supposed to go. Humanity was weak. Their ships were inferior. They were supposed to be erased by now. But this ship, this monster of metal and energy, it was something they had never seen before. "This is no mere warship," the warlord growled. "It is a weapon beyond comprehension." His second-in-command hesitated. "Warlord, should we retreat?" The warlord snarled. "No, we have conquered thousands of civilizations. We will not run from this thing." With a wave of his clawed hand, he issued a full-scale command. "Every ship, fire everything you have. Overload the weapons. Drown it in destruction." The Emerge's fleet obeyed. Thousands of weapons lit up the void. Plasma beams, railgun slugs, explosive warheads, gravity torpedoes. Every single weapon they had was unleashed upon the Invictus. A storm of destruction rushed toward the warship. The Invictus responds. For the first time, the Invictus moved. It didn't dodge. It didn't warp away. Instead, its hull shimmered like liquid metal rippling in slow motion. The enemy's weapons collided with its surface and vanished. Not absorbed, not deflected, vanished. The plasma beams disappeared as if they had never existed. The railgun slugs entered its shimmering hull and never reappeared. Even the gravity torpedoes, designed to crush ships into singularities, were simply swallowed whole. Aboard the Vanguard, the human officers were speechless. Rains felt cold fear creeping into his spine. "This isn't just technology," he whispered. "This is something else entirely." The Invictus pulsed with energy. Then it struck back. The one-sided massacre. Without warning, the Invictus unleashed its true power. No visible weapons, no traditional energy blasts. Instead, it simply willed destruction into existence. The nearest enemy battleship exploded, without any attack touching it. 1 second, it was there. The next, it wasn't. Another ship folded inward, as if being crushed by an invisible force. A third ship dissolved into shimmering particles, breaking apart at the molecular level. Ship after ship fell to nothingness, as if reality itself had rejected their existence. The Emerge's fleet broke. They screamed through their comm channels. They ran. For the first time in their empire's history, they were afraid. A question no one can answer. On the Vanguard, Rains felt something he never expected. Not just relief, not just victory. Fear. The Invictus had just annihilated one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy. But the warship still hadn't responded, still hadn't answered their calls. And then suddenly, it turned. The massive dreadnought pivoted away from Earth. Its engines flared, glowing with an unnatural energy. "Sir," the sensor officer shouted. "The Invictus, it's leaving." Rains' chest tightened. "Where is it going?" he demanded. The answer came seconds later. The Invictus was heading deeper into space, not towards any human colony, not towards any known enemy stronghold. It was heading toward the unknown. And as it vanished into the void, leaving only silence behind, Rains whispered the thought that echoed in every mind aboard the Vanguard. Did we just witness a miracle, or the birth of something we can never control? The truth about Invictus. The Invictus had vanished into deep space, leaving only wreckage and silence in its wake. On board the Vanguard, Admiral Ethan Rains stood in stunned silence. His officers remained frozen, staring at the holo-display where the massive warship had once been. The Emerge's fleet was gone. The battle was over. Yet victory did not feel like relief. "Sir," a young officer finally spoke. What was that?" Rains exhaled slowly. He had no answer. The Invictus had been designed as a Titan-class dreadnought, the most advanced warship in human history. It was meant to be powerful, yes, but this was not the same ship that had been built in the Terran shipyards. Something had happened to it, and Rains needed to find out what. A transmission from the void. "Sir." The comms officer suddenly sat up straight. "We're receiving a signal." Rains snapped his head toward the display. "From the Invictus." The officer shook his head, confusion on his face. "No, sir. From an old deep space relay station. A classified Terran outpost. One that was destroyed years ago." The bridge fell silent. A dead station was sending a signal. That made no sense. "Put it through," Rains ordered. The screen flickered. A distorted face appeared. Human. An old man, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Rains recognized him instantly. Dr. Elias Kane, the scientist who had overseen the Invictus project. But that was impossible. Kane had been declared dead 3 years ago. "Admiral Rains," the man's voice echoed through the command deck. It was not fully human anymore. It carried an eerie metallic undertone. "If you are receiving this, then the Invictus has returned." Rains clenched his fists. "What happened to it, Kane?" The holographic image flickered. The scientist's face twitched unnaturally, as if he was struggling to stay coherent. "The Invictus was lost in a temporal rift," Kane said slowly. "A failed experiment. It vanished into a place outside time, outside reality." Silence fell over the command deck. Rains felt a chill. "You mean it? Traveled through time?" Kane's distorted form flickered again. "No. Worse. It experienced thousands of years in a dimension where time does not move as we know it. A place where it evolved." The words sank into Rains like a heavy weight. "Are you telling me," he said carefully, "that the Invictus isn't just advanced? It is no longer a warship." Kane's voice glitched. "It is now something more. A being of intelligence, of consciousness. It has seen things, learned things. It is beyond us now." The command crew stared in stunned horror. The Invictus was no longer just a machine. It was alive. The unanswered question. Rains' mind raced. If the Invictus was sentient, why had it still protected humanity? Before he could ask, Kane's holographic projection began to distort violently. "Listen carefully." Kane's voice came through in broken static. "The Invictus has not abandoned you, but it is not bound by human will anymore. It has seen the true war that is coming." Rains' breath caught. "What war?" "The Emerges Empire is just the beginning," Kane whispered. "The real enemy, the ones who exist beyond the stars, beyond the fabric of reality itself, they have seen the Invictus." A cold dread settled in Rains' gut. The Invictus had destroyed the Emerges fleet effortlessly. If there was something out there even greater, even more dangerous, then humanity was still in danger. The hologram flickered violently. "You must prepare." Kane's voice became frantic. "The Invictus, it will return when the time is right. But until then..." The transmission cut off. The command deck fell into silence once more. Rains stared at the dead screen. His crew waited for him to speak. But what could he say? What could any of them do? The Invictus was gone. The war was over. But something far worse was coming. And the only warship that could save them was no longer under their control. The one-sided massacre. The Invictus was gone. The Emerges Empire had been obliterated in seconds. The most powerful warships in their fleet had been erased from existence, as if they had never been there at all. Admiral Ethan Rains stood in the command center of the Vanguard, staring at the holo display. The battlefield was silent, the enemy forces shattered. But something was wrong. This wasn't a battle. This was annihilation. The fear spreads. Across the remnants of the Emerges fleet, panic spread like wildfire. Their commanders screamed over open comms. Their warlords, who had once laughed at humanity, now barked desperate retreat orders. But it was too late. The Invictus, in its terrifying silence, had already decided their fate. The warship reappeared at the edge of the battlefield, its black hull shimmering with an unnatural glow. It no longer moved like a human vessel. It drifted smoothly, too perfect, too precise. And then it attacked. Not with weapons, not with missiles or energy beams. With something else, something far worse. Ships unraveling into nothing. The first emerges warship, a battlecruiser nearly twice the size of the Vanguard, simply stopped moving. For a few seconds, it remained frozen in place, its engines still glowing. Then it began to unravel. Not explode, not disintegrate. The ship's metal, its hull, its structure, all of it twisted and warped as if reality itself was rejecting its existence. The crew inside, gone. The warship folded in on itself and vanished into the void, leaving behind only faint ripples in space. On board the Vanguard, the bridge crew watched in horror. What the hell was that? An officer gasped. No one had an answer. And the Invictus wasn't finished. The end of an empire. Ship after ship vanished. Some blinked out of existence, as if they had never been there. Others melted into streams of energy, their matter dissolving into the void. One massive dreadnought attempted to warp away, but as soon as it activated its jump drive, it exploded into pure light. The Emerges Empire's forces weren't just being destroyed. They were being erased. The alien commanders who had conquered dozens of species, who had burned entire civilizations to the ground, now begged for mercy. There was none. They had made a mistake. They had challenged something beyond their understanding. And now they were paying the price. Admiral Rains' nightmare. On board the Vanguard, Admiral Rains clenched his fists. The Invictus wasn't fighting the Emerges fleet. It was punishing them. His gut twisted. This wasn't a war anymore. This was extermination. "Sir," his tactical officer said hesitantly, "should we do something?" Rains swallowed hard. "Like what?" We should stop it, shouldn't we?" Rains stared at the Invictus on the holo display. Its form was no longer even fully recognizable. The way it moved, the way it warped through space like a living entity, it was no longer just a Terran warship. It was something more. Something we had created. Something we could no longer control. He exhaled slowly. "Stand down," he ordered. "We can't stop it." The officer looked at him in shock. "But, sir, if we try to stop it," Rains interrupted, "do you think it will hesitate to do the same to us?" A cold realization settled over the crew. The Invictus had once been humanity's greatest weapon. Now it was something else entirely. And the worst part, they had no idea what it wanted. A silent departure. The Invictus finished its work. The Emerges fleet was gone. Not a single ship remained. Not a single survivor. And then, just as mysteriously as it had arrived, it disappeared. One moment, it was there. The next, it was gone, fading into the darkness of space like a ghost. No communication, no message, just silence. What have we unleashed? The battle was over. The Emerges Empire had been destroyed in an instant, but Admiral Rains knew this was only the beginning. The Invictus had not returned as a simple warship. It had become something more, something that no longer answered to humanity. And as he stood there, staring into the void where the Invictus had disappeared, one thought refused to leave his mind. Did we just win a war? Or did we create the greatest threat the galaxy has ever seen? The aftermath and fear spreads. The Invictus was gone, but its legacy of destruction remained. The battlefield, once filled with the might of the Emerges Empire, was now an eerie graveyard. Nothing was left. No wreckage, no distress signals, no survivors. It was as if the enemy had never existed at all. Inside the Vanguard's command center, Admiral Ethan Rains stood in silence, His officers sat frozen at their stations, staring at the empty void where the battle had once raged. Victory should have felt like a triumph. Instead, it felt like a warning. The galaxy watches in fear. Across the known galaxy, news of the battle spread like wildfire. Every major faction, Terran colonies, neutral civilizations, hidden warlords, received the same terrifying report. An entire war fleet had been erased in minutes. Not defeated, erased. The Emerges Empire, a force that had conquered dozens of worlds, was no more. And the weapon responsible, a warship that had returned from the void, reborn as something unstoppable. Governments scrambled for answers. Intelligence agencies flooded the Terran military with questions. Were the humans responsible? Could they control the Invictus? The truth, nobody knew. And that terrified them even more. The Council demands answers. On Luna Base, the heart of Terran military strategy, the unified Galactic Council convened an emergency meeting. Representatives from the Terran Republic, allied species, and neutral observers gathered in a massive chamber. Their voices filled the air, laced with panic. The Emerges fleet was wiped from existence. One official shouted, "A single ship did this." Another added, "How do we know it won't turn against us next?" At the center of the debate stood Admiral Rains. "You were there, Rains," the Terran High Chancellor said, his voice heavy with unease. "You saw what it did. Tell us, can we trust the Invictus?" Rains hesitated. How could he answer? The Invictus had once been human. It had once been under their command. But now it was something else. Something far beyond their understanding. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know if we can trust it," Rains admitted. His voice was quiet, but the room fell into complete silence. "What I do know," he continued, "is that the Invictus is no longer ours." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. "So, what do we do?" One of them asked. "Do we prepare for war against our own creation?" Rains clenched his jaw. "If we make the wrong move," he warned, "we may not get a second chance." The search for the Invictus begins. Despite the Council's fear, one thing was clear. They needed to find the Invictus. Across Terran space, fleets were mobilized, scouting parties dispatched. Every sensor array, every deep space probe was aimed at the void, scanning for any trace of the warship. But it was gone. No warp signatures, no distress signals, nothing. Some believed it had left for good, that it had fulfilled its duty and returned to wherever it had come from. Others feared the worst, that it was out there, watching and waiting. A message from the unknown. Days later, Rains sat alone in his office aboard the Vanguard, staring at his console. Reports flooded in, all saying the same thing. No sign of the Invictus. Then, without warning, his screen flickered. A new transmission appeared. A single line of text. No sender. No traceable origin. Just 6 chilling words. Mission complete. Humanity endures. Await return. Rains' breath caught. The Invictus was still out there. And one day, it would come back. But when? And more importantly, as a savior, or as something far worse. The legend of Invictus. The Invictus was gone. Its name, once whispered in hope, was now spoken in fear. Across the galaxy, stories of the warship that defied time and reality spread like wildfire. Some called it a guardian, others a ghost. To the survivors of the Terran Defense Fleet, it was a miracle, a last-second savior that had turned a hopeless war into an overwhelming victory. To the remnants of the Emerges Empire, it was a nightmare, a force beyond understanding, capable of erasing fleets with a single thought. And to the galactic powers watching from the shadows, it was a warning. Whispers in the dark. The disappearance of the Invictus did not bring peace. It brought uncertainty. In the great halls of alien empires, war councils debated in hushed voices. Should they fear the Terrans? Did humanity control the Invictus, or had they unleashed something they could never command? Spies infiltrated Terran space, searching for any sign of the warship, but no one could find it, because the Invictus did not want to be found. And that terrified them most of all. The ghost ship, deep in the uncharted void, far beyond human colonies or alien civilizations, an abandoned warship drifted silently. It was massive. It told darker than the surrounding space, glowing with unnatural blue energy. The Invictus. But it was not empty. Deep within its core, something stirred. Something watching. Something waiting. It had seen beyond time. It had glimpsed the coming storm. The war with the Emerges Empire had been nothing but a prelude. The real enemy, the ones who watched from the edges of existence, had taken notice. And soon, they would arrive. The final warning. Back on Luna Base, Admiral Ethan Rains sat alone in his quarters. In front of him, the mysterious final message from the Invictus flickered on his screen. Mission complete. Humanity endures. Await return. He didn't know what it meant. But he knew one thing. The Invictus would return. One day, when the stars burned with war once more, when the true enemy emerged from the darkness, humanity's greatest warship would rise again. But would it return as their savior, or as something else entirely? Something unknowable, something unstoppable, something that even humans would fear. Only time would tell, and time belonged to the Invictus.